That Thursday evening in October, standing in the back corner of my own restaurant, watching 250 guests celebrate my business partner like he had personally invented farm-to-table cuisine, I realized something I should have seen coming for years. The humiliation didn't announce itself with trumpets. It slipped in quietly, the way smoke creeps under a door before you notice the fire. Daniel Martinez stood at the podium near the open kitchen, backlit by the Edison bulbs we'd hung together in 1991, when this place was nothing but exposed brick and broken dreams. He wore a charcoal Armani suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment on the house Linda and I bought in Selwood 30 years ago. His third wife, a woman half his age, whose name I could never remember, sat at the head table wearing enough diamonds to fund a small country. The champagne flowed. A jazz quartet played something soft and expensive in the corner. The ice sculpture of our logo, a sheaf of wheat intertwined with a chef's knife, slowly melted under the warm October air, drifting in from NW 23rd Avenue. I thought about how fitting that was. Everything solid eventually turns to water if you give it enough heat. Daniel was 43 minutes into his speech. I knew because I'd been counting. Not because I wanted to, but because counting was the only thing keeping me from walking out through the kitchen and never coming back. And I want to thank everyone who made this 32nd anniversary possible, Daniel said, his voice carrying across the restaurant with practiced ease. Our incredible guests, our dedicated team, our amazing suppliers, and of course, the vision that transformed Portland's dining scene forever. The vision, his vision, apparently. No mention of the two young men who'd met in the kitchen of Jake's famous crawfish in 1989, both of us wearing stained whites and working doubles to make rent. Both of us dreaming bigger than the salmon we were grilling and the Dungeness crabs we were cracking. No mention of the nights we'd spent at the 24-hour Denny's on 82nd Avenue, sketching restaurant concepts on napkins until the sun came up. No mention of my wife Linda selling her grandmother's pearl necklace so we could make payroll that brutal first winter when we had 12 customers total in the entire month of February. I shifted my weight. My left knee ached. 32 years of standing on restaurant floors, working 14-hour days, and hauling 50-pound bags of organic flour had taken their toll on this 64-year-old body. Daniel looked like he'd just stepped out of a spa up there. He'd stopped working the line 15 years ago, said his time was better spent on relationship building and brand development. The applause erupted as Daniel finally wrapped up. I watched him step down from the podium, and that's when Sarah Kim, our general manager, approached him with a long wooden box. The kind of box that means something expensive is inside. "Daniel," she said, her voice bright and carrying through the microphone someone had forgotten to turn off. "The team wanted to give you something special to commemorate your leadership and vision." He opened it with the theatrical flourish of a man who knew everyone was watching. Even from where I stood near the prep station, I could see the glint of Damascus steel. A complete set of handcrafted Japanese chef's knives, the kind made by artisans whose waiting lists stretched 5 years into the future. The crowd gasped. Someone shouted, "Those are Masamoto Honyaki," and everyone laughed like they were all in on some inside joke about $65,000 knife sets. Daniel held up the gyuto, the chef's knife, and the room erupted again. He hugged Sarah. He hugged our sous chef Marcus. He posed for photos, the knife catching the Edison bulb light with every gesture like some kind of culinary Excalibur. And then Sarah walked toward me. I straightened up, something hopeful flickering in my chest despite everything I knew, despite every warning sign I'd ignored for years. 32 years. Surely there would be acknowledgement. Surely someone remembered that there were 2 names on the original LLC paperwork we'd filed in 1991. "Tom," Sarah said, smiling in that professional way people smile when they're following a script someone else wrote. "We didn't forget about you." She handed me a book, not a box, not even a card with any weight to it, a cookbook. One of those coffee table cookbooks they sell at Powell's for $30, the kind with glossy photos and recipes you'll never make. I opened it there in front of the dessert station, with the sound of Daniel's laughter carrying across the room like he owned the very air we breathed. There was an inscription on the inside cover, written in Sarah's handwriting. "Thanks for keeping the kitchen running smoothly all these years. You're the backbone of our operation. the Harvest and Hearth family, keeping the kitchen running smoothly. I had spent 32 years building this restaurant. I had personally developed 70% of the dishes on our menu, including the Oregon truffle risotto that Bon Appetit named one of the 10 best dishes in America in 2015. I had mentored 43 line cooks, 18 of whom now had their own restaurants across the Pacific Northwest. I had worked through 2 herniated discs, a broken wrist from a car accident, and my father's funeral because we had a full reservation book, and the kitchen couldn't wait. And they thanked me for keeping it running smoothly. I looked up across the restaurant. Daniel caught my eye. He raised his glass of champagne toward me, those $65,000 knives gleaming on the table in front of him. He smiled, not a guilty smile, not an apologetic smile, a smile that said he knew exactly what message was being sent. I nodded back, set the cookbook on the dessert station next to the hazelnut panna cotta, and I walked out of Harvest and Hearth at exactly 9:17 inches the evening, while 250 people celebrated a man who had systematically erased me from the story of my own life. The October air hit my face as I stepped onto Northwest 23rd, Portland at night, the streetlights making everything look like a postcard. People walking past with shopping bags from boutiques I couldn't afford to enter. Couples heading to wine bars and craft cocktail lounges. Everyone living their normal Thursday night, while mine quietly fell apart. I didn't go home immediately. I couldn't face Linda yet. She'd been so excited about tonight, had helped me pick out my suit, had told me how proud she was of everything we'd built together. How could I tell her that her husband, the co-founder and executive chef of one of Portland's most acclaimed restaurants, had been reduced to a $30 cookbook? Instead, I drove. I ended up at the Denny's on 82nd, the same one where Daniel and I used to plan our future over coffee and hash browns at 3 in the morning. I sat in a booth that probably hadn't been reupholstered since 1991 and ordered coffee I didn't drink. That's when my phone buzzed. An email from Richard Chen, our corporate attorney. Subject line: confidential, sale documents for review. I opened it with hands that had cooked thousands of meals, but now couldn't seem to hold a phone steady. The email had been sent to Daniel at 8:47 p.m. I'd been CC'd by accident, probably because Richard's assistant had autofilled both our names and didn't notice. Daniel, as discussed, here are the revised sale documents, with Tom's percentage adjusted to the amount we agreed upon. The buyer, Constellation Restaurant Group, is comfortable with the 9% payout to him, given his limited operational involvement in recent years. They view the acquisition primarily as your brand and relationships. Let me know if you want to proceed with the December 1st closing. The $28 million offer stands, but they need commitment by November 1st. Richard. I read it 3 times. Then I read it again. Then I read it until the words stopped making sense and just became shapes on a screen. Daniel was selling the restaurant. Our restaurant. The one we'd built together from absolutely nothing, working 100-hour weeks and eating ramen when we couldn't afford anything else. And he was giving me 9%. I pulled out my phone's calculator with shaking hands. 9% of $28 million was $2,520,000. That might sound like a lot to some people. It would have sounded like a fortune to the 32-year-old version of me who'd maxed out 6 credit cards to buy our first commercial oven. But according to the original operating agreement we'd signed on September 15th, 1991, at a lawyer's office in Old Town that probably didn't exist anymore, Daniel Martinez and Thomas Sullivan were equal partners. 50-50, down the middle, for better or worse, in profit and in loss. 50% of $28 million was $14 million. Daniel was stealing $11,480,000 from me, and he just made sure I knew it. With that smile, with that wave across the restaurant, while holding $65,000 knives that our employees had probably been pressured into chipping in for. I sat in that Denny's until 2 in the morning, reading and rereading that email. The third shift waitress started vacuuming around my booth. I didn't move. Finally, I drove home. Linda was asleep in our bedroom, her reading glasses still on, a book about Italian gardens open on her chest. I didn't wake her. Instead, I went down to the basement, to the small office I'd set up years ago, the one that still smelled faintly of sage and thyme, no matter how many times, Linda complained. I pulled out the filing cabinet I hadn't opened in a decade. Inside were the original documents, the operating agreement, the LLC paperwork, the bank statements from those early years when we were one bad month away from bankruptcy. And there, in a folder I'd almost forgotten about, was something Daniel didn't know I had. In 2001, during the dot-com crash, when the restaurant was finally making good money but couldn't get a conventional loan to buy our building, I'd bought it myself. The historic brick building on Northwest 23rd, built in 1923, with the restaurant on the ground floor and 2 apartments upstairs. I'd taken out a second mortgage on my house. Linda had cried when I told her, but she'd signed the papers anyway because she believed in us, in me. The restaurant paid rent to me, Thomas Sullivan, private citizen, not to Harvest and Hearth LLC, a modest amount that barely covered my mortgage payments. Daniel had suggested at the time that we keep it separate for tax purposes. I'd trusted him. Now I understood why he'd wanted it separate. Because when you sell a restaurant, you sell its assets, its brand, its reputation, its lease. But you can't sell a building you don't own. And Daniel didn't own this building. I did. I pulled out the property deed. My name, clear as day. Thomas Michael Sullivan, sole owner. Then I did something I hadn't done in 32 years. I called in sick to work. The next morning, while Daniel was probably showing off his new knives to his country club friends, I met with Catherine Hoffman, a lawyer who specialized in business disputes. Her office was in the Pearl District, in one of those converted warehouses with exposed ductwork and art on the walls that cost more than cars. I brought every document I had. I spread them across her glass conference table like evidence in a crime scene. "How long until the sale closes?" Catherine asked, her pen tapping against her legal pad. The email said December 1st. They need commitment by November 1st. She nodded, her eyes scanning the documents. "Here's what we know. You own 50% of the business, according to the original operating agreement. Unless there's been a modification you signed, that stands. The fact that he's trying to close a sale without your signature is already a problem. Can he do it? Can he cut me out?" "Not legally." She paused. "But Tom, I need to ask you something. Have you signed anything in the past few years? Any amendments to the operating agreement? Any documents Daniel presented as routine paperwork?" I thought back. There had been things. Annual reviews, tax documents, insurance updates, lease renewals. Had I read them all carefully? I wanted to say yes, but I've always tried to be honest, even when it hurts. "I don't know," I admitted. I trusted him. Catherine's expression told me everything I needed to know about how dangerous trust can be. "We need to go through everything," she said. "Every signature you've put on every document for the past decade. If he's planning to cut you out, he's been laying groundwork. Men like Daniel don't make moves like this without preparation." For the next 3 weeks, I lived 2 lives. During the day, I went to the restaurant. I prepped mise en place. I expedited during dinner service. I smiled at Daniel in the hallways. I even used the cookbook he'd given me as a cutting board for breaking down chickens, just to see if he'd notice. He didn't. But every evening, after service ended and I'd sent the line cooks home, I met with Catherine. We reconstructed 32 years of partnership. Every contract, every signature, every handshake deal we'd memorialized on paper. And the picture that emerged made me feel like I'd been sleepwalking through my own life. For the past 9 years, Daniel had been systematically repositioning himself as the sole creative force behind Harvest and Hearth. He'd registered trademarks in his name alone. He'd formed a management company, DMZ Hospitality LLC, that held contracts with our key suppliers and our reservation system. He'd even trademarked our restaurant name and logo in 2018, something I'd assumed we owned jointly. "He's been planning this for nearly a decade," Catherine said during one late-night session in her office. "This isn't opportunistic. This is calculated." How did I not see it? "Because you were doing the work," she said simply. "You were in the kitchen. You were creating the food. You were training the staff. You were building the actual restaurant while he was building the appearance of control." On November 3rd, Daniel invited me to lunch. Just the two of us, he said. Partnership business to discuss. We met at Andina, a Peruvian place in the Pearl District. The kind of restaurant where the servers wear all black and the wine list requires a graduate degree to understand. Daniel ordered a $40 glass of Malbec before we'd even sat down. Tom, he said, cutting into ceviche that cost more than my weekly grocery bill, I wanted to talk to you about an opportunity. The sale, I said. He paused, mid-cut. His fork hovered over the plate. You know about that. Richard CC'd me by accident on his email. His jaw tightened, but he recovered with the smooth ease of someone who'd spent decades charming investors and food critics. Right. Well, then you understand the situation. We have a buyer. Excellent terms. Clean exit for both of us. 9% isn't an exit for me, Daniel. It's theft. He set down his fork carefully, deliberately. Tom, let's be realistic here. Yes, on paper, you own 50%. But what have you actually contributed to the business side in the past decade? I've been the face of this restaurant. I've cultivated the relationships with critics, with investors, with the Portland dining community. I've built the brand that makes this sale possible. I've created the food that made that brand worth anything. Creating food isn't the same as building a business. There's a difference between being a cook and being an entrepreneur. The word cook landed like a slap. 32 years of partnership reduced to cook. He leaned forward. Look, I'm being generous with 9%. The buyer doesn't even think you're necessary to the transition. They're acquiring my vision, my network, my reputation. I convinced them to include you out of respect for our history. Our history. 3 decades reduced to a footnote that warranted 9% and a $30 cookbook. No, I said. No deal. I don't approve the sale. Daniel smiled, and there wasn't an ounce of warmth in it. Tom, you don't have approval rights anymore. Check the amendments we signed in 2019. Either partner can authorize a sale with 60-day notice to the other partner. I gave you that notice last week. Formally. The papers were served to your house yesterday. Linda probably thought it was junk mail. Amendments in 2019. The year we'd restructured for tax purposes. The year Daniel had brought in a new accountant who'd presented me with a stack of documents, 3 inches thick. I'd signed them. All of them. Because partners trust each other. I'll fight it, I said. He finished his wine. With what money? Legal fees will destroy you. The sale will go through. You'll get your 9%, minus whatever you waste on lawyers. Or, he paused, you could accept it gracefully. Take the money. Retire. Linda's been wanting to travel. You've earned rest, Tom. You're 64 years old. How much longer were you planning to stand on your feet in a hot kitchen? I stood up, left my untouched ceviche on the table, and walked out while Daniel sat there, probably already mentally spending my $11 million. I called Catherine from my truck, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. He says he has an amendment from 2019 that gives him unilateral sale authority. Do you remember signing it? No. But that doesn't mean I didn't. There was a long pause. Tom, I need to tell you something. I pulled property records this morning. The building. The one you own? What about it? Daniel filed for adverse possession last month. My blood went cold. The truck suddenly felt too small, too hot. What does that mean? It means he's claiming that because the restaurant has used the building continuously for 22 years and paid you rent, the building should legally transfer to the LLC through sustained commercial use. It's a long shot in Oregon, but with 22 years of continuous use, he has an argument. The building, my building, the one I'd risked everything to buy, the one worth at least $3 million in Portland's current market. Daniel was trying to steal that too. Can he win? Maybe. Oregon adverse possession law is complicated. We'd have to fight it, and it would take time. Everything is a fight now. Yes, Catherine said. But Tom, the building is our leverage. Even if his amendments hold up, even if he can push through the sale, he needs that building to make the deal work. Constellation Restaurant Group isn't buying the name Harvest and Hearth to move it to a different location. They're buying the specific restaurant at the specific address with the specific ambiance. Without your building, the deal falls apart. I looked out at the Willamette River, gray under November clouds. Somewhere in this city, Daniel was celebrating, counting his money, erasing me like I'd never existed. What do? We take away his ammunition, Catherine said, and then we show him what happens when you try to erase the person who actually created everything you're trying to sell. On November 12th, I did 3 things. First, I formally rejected the sale in writing, delivered by courier to both Daniel and Richard Chen. Regardless of what amendments Daniel thought he had, I was on record as opposing any transaction. Second, I filed a lawsuit against Daniel Martinez and Harvest and Hearth LLC for partnership dissolution, breach of fiduciary duty, and fraud. If Daniel wanted to sell, fine, but we'd do it properly, with proper valuation and proper division. Third, and most importantly, I went to the restaurant at 5 in the morning, before anyone else arrived, and I posted eviction notices on every door. As the legal owner of the building, I was terminating Harvest and Hearth LLC's lease, effective December 15th, 45 days notice, which was more than the Oregon statute required. Every piece of equipment, every table, every Edison bulb, every custom range hood had to be removed. The buyer was conducting due diligence. They were reviewing financials. They were touring the space. They were planning their transition timeline. And in 33 days, there wouldn't be a restaurant to transition to. Daniel called me at 7:45 that morning. I was having coffee at the Denny's again, the same booth, watching my phone light up with his name. I didn't answer. He called again at 8:03, and 8:17, and 8:34. By noon, he'd called 49 times. I finally answered at call 50. "Tom, what the hell are you doing?" His voice cracked around the edges. The smooth charm was gone. "Terminating a lease. I own the building. You're renting it. I'm ending that arrangement. You can't do this." "Actually, I can. Check the lease agreement. Either party can terminate with 45 days' notice. You taught me about notice requirements when you tried to sell my life's work for 9%. The deal falls through without that location. The buyer won't purchase a restaurant concept that doesn't have the specific space. Then I guess you have a problem." There was silence. I could hear him breathing, calculating, trying to find an angle he'd missed. "Tom, please, be reasonable." "Reasonable? From a man who tried to steal $11 million from me?" "Here's reasonable, Daniel. We split everything 50-50, like the original operating agreement says. You get 14 million. I get 14 million. We both walk away clean. That's insane. I built this restaurant's reputation. I brought in the investors. I cultivated the critics. You stood on my food and convinced yourself you were flying," I interrupted. "Without my recipes, my mentorship, my 40-plus years of cooking experience, you'd still be sweet-talking investors with nothing to show for it. I'll fight the eviction." "With what argument? It's my building. I'll win the adverse possession claim." "Maybe. But that'll take 18 months in Oregon courts. Your buyer needs to close December 1st. They're not going to wait around for a legal battle." Silence again. Longer this time. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "I want what I always deserved. Equal partnership, equal respect, equal payout. And I want you to stand up in front of the staff and tell them the truth about who created the food that made Harvest and Hearth worth $28 million. You're destroying 32 years of partnership over ego." "No," I said. "You destroyed it when you decided I was disposable. I'm just making sure you don't profit from erasing me." He hung up. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel tried everything. He sent lawyers. He sent our accountant. He even sent Sarah Kim, who apologized profusely for the cookbook situation and said it had been Daniel's idea, that she'd pushed back, but he'd insisted. I appreciated her honesty. But I didn't budge. On November 28th, Catherine called me at home. Linda and I were making dinner together, something we hadn't done in years. Roasted chicken, nothing fancy, just food. "The buyer pulled out," Catherine said. "The deal's dead." "Good. Daniel's lawyer just contacted me. He wants to negotiate a settlement. Tell him I'm available tomorrow. Thanksgiving seems appropriate." We met at Catherine's office on Thanksgiving Day. The building was empty, except for us. Daniel looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. The confidence was gone. The Armani suit looked rumpled. He wasn't wearing his new watch. His lawyer laid out terms. 50-50 split of everything. Restaurant to be dissolved, and assets sold separately since we couldn't find another buyer willing to work with the partnership dispute. And a public acknowledgement, in writing, distributed to all staff, that I had been equal creative partner from day one. There's one more thing, I said. Daniel looked up, exhausted. What? The knives. The $65,000 Japanese knife set. I want you to sell them and donate the money to Portland Community College's culinary program, in both our names. His jaw clenched. That's petty. No, I said. It's poetic. Those knives represented what you thought this was about. Status, recognition, being celebrated while someone else did the work. But the best thing we ever did was train young people who wanted to cook for real. So take your trophy and turn it into something that actually matters. He stared at me for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone who'd just realized how completely they'd lost. You know what, Tom? Fine. You win. This isn't about winning, I said. This is about remembering what was real. We signed the dissolution papers on December 20th. The restaurant's assets were sold in pieces. The kitchen equipment went to 3 different restaurants opening in the neighborhood. The wine cellar went to a collector in Lake Oswego. The custom tables and chairs went to a hotel in Bend. I kept the building and leased it to a collective of 3 young chefs who wanted to open a Southeast Asian fusion concept. I gave them a rent they could actually afford. Daniel and I each walked away with $13,800,000 after legal fees and taxes. The day the money hit my account, Linda and I sat at our kitchen table in Selwood, the same table we'd bought at an estate sale in 1992 because it was all we could afford. And we just looked at each other. What do we do now? She asked. We do what we should have done a long time ago, I said. We live. We bought a small house on the Oregon coast. Nothing extravagant, just a place where you can hear the ocean and watch the storms roll in from the west. I volunteer at the community kitchen 3 days a week, teaching culinary skills to people transitioning out of homelessness, teaching them that food can be dignity, that cooking can be power. Daniel moved to San Francisco. I heard he started a consulting firm for restaurants. I hope he's happy. I genuinely do, because I spent too many years being angry, and anger is a cage you build with your own hands. But sometimes, when I'm having coffee at that Denny's on 82nd Avenue, the same booth where all this started to crumble, I think about that anniversary party, about that $30 cookbook, about how close I came to letting someone steal not just my money, but my dignity, my contribution, my truth. And I think about the phone calls. Daniel called me 83 times. During those 2 weeks, I held the eviction notice over his head. 83 times. His voice getting more desperate with each message, more willing to negotiate, more ready to finally acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, I'd been more than a cook keeping the kitchen running smoothly. By the time he made call 83, I'd already made my decision. The partnership was over. The trust was gone. You can't build anything lasting on a foundation of erasure. So I didn't answer. I let it ring. And eventually, he stopped calling. That silence, that absence of desperation in my voicemail, was sweeter than any review, any award, any amount of money could ever be. Because it meant I'd finally reclaimed what he tried to take from me. Not the money, not the restaurant, but the simple truth that I had built something real. Something that fed people, employed people, trained people, mattered to people. And no one could erase that. Not even a man who'd once been my brother in every way that counted. The rain falls heavy on the Oregon coast this December. I watch it from my porch, coffee in hand, and I think about all those years. The early mornings at the farmer's market, the late nights perfecting recipes, the sacrifices Linda and I made so 2 young men could chase a dream of creating something beautiful with food. We built something, Daniel and I. That's true, but I was the foundation. I was the food. I was the reason people kept coming back. And when someone tries to build their empire on your work while pretending you don't exist, that's when you remind them what happens when the foundation walks away. Everything crumbles. The deal collapses, the buyer disappears, the dream dies. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what needed to happen so something better could be built in its place. Something honest, something true, something worth more than all the Japanese knives in the world.